anyways.
No, they don't want to see that I'm.
So don't click anything other than the next slide.
Are we ready to start?
Yes, it's 3 o'clock.
Good morning or afternoon, or wherever you're calling from. I'd like to welcome you to the launch of the International Consortium for FDMAS. My name is Adrienne McBride. I'm a board director for the IC-FDMAS, and I also serve as the executive director for the FDMAS Alliance. Please take this time to put your name and where you're calling from in the chat, and welcome. Next slide. Please note that there's interpretation available in English and in Spanish. And I'd like to remind you of a couple of things. This meeting is being recorded. Please turn off your video and microphone when you're not presenting. When you're asking questions, please make sure that you turn your video and microphone back on. Please put all the questions in the chat. We will be monitoring them throughout the presentations. There will be breakout rooms open and available during conference breaks. And please send any questions, comments, and feedback after the meeting to info@icfdmas.com. I'd like to remind you of the mission of the International Consortium. The mission of the International Consortium for FDMAS is to improve the care and find solutions for the unmet needs of patients and their caregivers through the promotion of multi-stakeholder, collaborative, and patient-centric clinical and translational and basic research. Next slide. Our goals for the day are few, but they're very important. We're going to update you on the International Consortium. We're also going to review the current activities of our members. And this presentation and this day will provide you an opportunity to connect. You've all should be provided the agenda, and we're going to do our best to stay on that agenda today. And now I'd like to make some introductions. First, it is an honor to welcome everybody and introduce the IC-FDMAS board and the inaugural executive committee. Dr. Natasha Appelman-Dijkstra is an internist endocrinologist from Leiden University Medical Center in the Netherlands. She has worked there since 2012, where she specializes in bone and mineral conditions. Natasha also leads the LUMC multidisciplinary FDMAS team and has published many studies with her team on FDMAS. Natasha also leads the European Registry for Rare Bone and Mineral Conditions, and specifically a special disease-specific module for FDMAS to collect clinical and patient-reported outcomes. She also serves on the medical and scientific board of the Dutch FD Patient Association from its inception. It's also my pleasure to introduce Dr. Michael Collins. Dr. Michael Collins is an endocrinologist who specializes in bone disorders. He's dedicated over 20 years of work for caring and for studying of patients with FDMAS at the United States National Institutes of Health. His work has been instrumental in both developing treatments and establishing the standard care of patients with FDMAS. He has worked closely with patient groups, including the MAGIC Foundation, the FDMAS Alliance, and now the International Consortium for FDMAS. Martine Dekker, she serves as the ICFDMAS Communications Director. She's also one of the founding members of the Dutch FD Patient Association. After being diagnosed with FD in 2011, she initiated the FD Patient Association that officially launched in July 2016. Since that time, she's worked closely with specialists, researchers, and other patient associations, both nationally and internationally. Her aim is to connect specialists, researchers, and patients to encourage research and enhance treatment of patients. In her daily life, Martine is a chief commercial officer, and she holds a bachelor's degree in international management. Tova Bernstein is our acting secretary of the consortium, and as well as the FDMAS Alliance Community Engagement Director. And I just want to give a shout out to Tova because I know how much work she's done behind the scenes to make this day possible. Again, it is my honor and privilege to work with these amazing individuals to advance the goals of the global FDMAS community. And without further ado, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Natasha, where she will continue the program with an introduction to the consortium. Thank you and welcome.
So thank you very much, Adrian, for your kind words and your kind introduction. In the meantime, I'm going to share my screen, and Martina will take over for any possible technical issues that might occur during the meeting. And if you just dropped your connection off, don't worry, and Martina will definitely let you in again. So I'm going to give a short presentation about the introduction and the background of the consortium. Just have to wait till everything comes in. Okay, great. The International Consortium for Fibrous Dysplasia and McEwen-Albright syndrome. Well, it all started, and we have to
Sorry,
think.
Natasha, my screen is still black, so I cannot.
Oh, that's because
see
he
yours at
says
the moment.
he says here that he is sharing.
Yeah,
You can stop the share and do the sharing again.
I don't know if I was the only one.
You were not.
Okay.
And
Yeah, this is better. Yeah, thank you.
better.
Yeah.
So then we start with this nice picture again. This was taken in the Leiden meeting, but the first meeting from the consortium, which was not a consortium then, but a very good start and organized by Dr. Kassim Javed from Oxford, was in 2015. That was followed by a second meeting in 2016, and this was taken for the Leiden meeting in 2017, and where we also hosted an International Patient Day, where many of the patients who are also here present today were able to connect with the majority of the people who are now in the consortium. So that was a very nice meeting. Then we skipped for 1 year, but went to Florence instead in 2019, then hosted by Professor Maria Luisa Brandi. And afterwards, of course, we all know what happened because due to COVID, all the other meetings were postponed in the meantime. But we're still hoping to come to Bethesda next year. And probably Dr. Collins will tell us more about it later on today. So what you can see here, and this is the reason also I put this picture here, is that the meetings were always joint meetings with patients, researchers, and clinicians, but also multidisciplinary. So besides endocrinologists, pediatric endocrinologists, we also made sure there were orthopedic surgeons present, rheumatologists present, oral maxillary surgeons, ophthalmologists, ENT doctors, and also medical students, also because learning about the rare disease always starts also within the medical profession very early. And the main goal of the meetings was come together and work together. Because during the meetings, we had updates on progress of ongoing trials and projects, like we're also going to give you today. But then, of course, since we're online in a shorter version, the clinical pathway was developed and discussed extensively. We had the kickoff of multiple collaborations. And then in 2017, because we thought it was time to finalize or make it more official that we are a consortium, there was a core writing group installed, which started to write the charter and to develop the International Consortium, which gladly came together last year. So the International Consortium for fibrous McCune-Albright syndrome, in short, ICFD-MES, with the board of directors, which we decided always should be a patient representative and a researcher or a clinician. And then we have, of course, some sort of support, because it's a very intensive job to do and to start and to make it to kick off. So we're very happy to have the support from Michael Collins, from Martine Dekker. And also with Martine Dekker, also from the Patient Association from the Netherlands, whom I do have to mention shortly, because also the development of the website, the LinkedIn page, and also this lovely logo were made available by the Patients Association from the Netherlands. So they've been a great help and instrumental for the further development and professionalization of this consortium. And why were we so keen on getting the consortium there? Well, I think it's very good that we have to realize that in some countries there's a patients association, but in many countries there's not. Also, there are networks in some countries for doctors who care for patients with rare diseases, but also again, in many countries there are not. So it's very important to have a reliable source of information, and also for context for patients and doctors. So without a society of expert network around. And also because in the future, if we want to proceed with creating a cure for the disease and improving the care for our patients, future applications should be in a consortium way to have a better rate of success, but also because we can be complementary to each other. And in addition, at this moment, no guidelines are available for fibrous dysplasia McCune-Albright syndrome. So there's also something that we want to stimulate in the future to develop some sort of guidelines, and the care pathway, which has already been published a couple of years ago, is a very, very good start for this. The mission, as Adrian already mentioned, this is the mission statement that we also promote on our website, is really to improve the care and to unravel this rare disease, which has a various influence on the lives of our patients. For this reason, we have a contact platform, we have the website, we will hopefully in the future connect again with live meetings, and otherwise we will try to keep you updated also with these shorter online meetings, just to make sure that everybody stays on top of it. I'm going to highlight now some of the already major achievements, I think, for this very young consortium. As said, the outcomes of the multidisciplinary workshop in Oxford were published in 2017, and then in the end led to the best practice management guidelines for fibrous dysplasia and McCune-Albright syndrome, which was led by Dr. Kassim Javed again, who did a tremendous job in getting everybody together on the same page. And we know that you had at least over 50 versions of this of the guideline. So we hope when we're going to do an update of the guideline, it will be quicker and shorter because of the good work you already did before. But this is freely available. And one of the special things about the guideline is also that together with the clinician guideline, we also produced at the same time a patient information form with questions you can ask to your doctor when you go to the doctor for the fibrous dysplasia McCune-Albright syndrome. And later on, Dr. Collins will also discuss the guideline briefly again. Like I said, also during these meetings, it was a very good starting point for collaborations. So already we had a couple of joint publications from which the majority of them I'm presenting here. And so also very recently in May, the neuropathic-like pain paper from Dr. Kassim Javed and also the NIH, Alison Boyce and Anne-Marie Heerkaart came out. So congratulations on that beautiful recent paper. But as you can see, due to the fact that we could join forces, we were able to enlarge our populations and cohorts, and therefore also were able to do additional studies that were not possible to do in the past when we're just using our own patients. But this was all about the physicians, and of course, Martien Dekker is going to tell you later onwards an update on the patient associations. But I think also the patients associations kicked off very good because they, under the lead of the FDA MES Alliance, the Global Awareness Week was initiated, and many of the actions also, this was still from the actions from this year, were picked up by the other patient associations. So I think this is also a very good thing to go with. And in the end, at the end of the awareness week, we had the consortium launch together with the website where you can find more information, patient information, doctor information, and also a way to connect with us. So as stated before, if you miss something, if you want to connect to start a study, just give us a message and we can connect you with other people who are interested in the same topic.
I don't think the audio is playing.
I think my audio didn't work, right? No, so the meaning of the movie was just to show you what already the collaboration between the patient associations and also from this consortium has led to. Because this was a movie which was designed again by the patient association from the Netherlands, but they deliberately make sure that the movie could be used and translated for the different other organizations. So in that way, we were able to do a Dutch to an English translation. And if you want to see it or use it, you can just see it at the website and people can use it. I think that's one of the main things I think that has brought this consortium together. And I think we have a very prosperous future because of the fact that due to the collaboration and all the efforts that have jointly been made, I think the collaboration has been very, very good, not only between the doctors, but also between the researchers and the patients. And I hope this will be a kickoff for a very nice continuation of this. If there are any questions, I'm open, of course, to any questions. And otherwise, I would just like to give the floor back to Adrian.
No questions in the chat so far.
Okay, so that's great. So if there are no questions, I think we can continue with the rest of the program. Adrian, are you still here?
I am here.
It appears next up we have Dr. Michael Collins with the evaluation of the clinical care pathway. Dr. Collins?
Thank you, Tova. Give me a second to share my screen. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, thank you.
Great. So thank you, Adrian, for the introduction. Thank you so much, Tova, for all the work you've done organizing this. I appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who's also here on the call, who's been part of this big adventure that's really coming to, in some ways, fruition today. I've been asked to speak about the evaluation of the clinical care pathway, which I'll do. My goal is not so much, and I won't go through the pathway per se in terms of the details of it, but more to talk about what a successful publication it's been, how we did it, and to talk more in depth and have some discussion, I hope, about what the next version should look like and when we should do that and how we should do that. So as Kasim pointed out in the chat, it's now Up to 48,000 accesses have taken place, and this is in part because the Orphanet Journal of Rare Diseases is an open access journal, and that's a real advantage to that. And I'll talk later about, do we want to stick with the Orphanet Journal of Rare Diseases? They've been very good to us. They now have 295 papers on their website that are about fibrous dysplasia and or the McCune-Albright syndrome. The other measures of success of our paper are that it's been cited 118 times, and I'll give you some context to that later. There's this relatively new metric called alt metric, and we have a score of 23 on that. Generally, 20 is considered better than contemporaries. And another metric is this is ranked in the 90th centile, so that's high. 28,000 over 286,000 tracked articles of similar age in journals. So by all metrics, it's been very useful. And I'm open to hearing, would love to hear, especially from the patients, how they have found this useful. I know that we, as investigators and doctors, have found this useful, and we share it a lot and cite it a lot, and always receive thanks from the other clinicians with whom we share it. It was discussed a little bit how we came about doing this, and that's shown a little bit more here. We initially developed a guideline development group, which was 51 clinical and patient experts from 13 different countries. So quite a group to herd, and Kasim did a great job with that. And I think really it was Kasim and Dr. Boyce, Alison Boyce, who really probably did the lion's share of this tedious work of keeping all these people together and keeping them moving forward. As was also stated earlier, we really tried to include what we see as all of the players in this: pediatric and adult rheumatologists and endocrinologists, patient support groups, dentistry, pain representatives from the FDMAS patient groups. The guideline development group was formed at the consensus meeting in Oxford, as was discussed. And what we did was reviewed the preceding 30 years of published evidence for this paper. So that was quite a lot of work, as you can imagine. And as Natasha pointed out earlier, the next version may not be so onerous, given that we've already done that earlier review. The responses were reviewed at the consensus meeting in Lyon in 2016. A first draft of the pathway was circulated to the broader consortium membership for comment, and statements with over 70% consensus among the development group were considered and included in the final report. We also stated in that paper that the consortium will review the guidelines at least every 5 years or sooner, if required by breakthrough findings from the published literature. So we're approaching that, and I'll give you some consideration. Gabriella, come on. Anyway, the patient group independently developed a separate patient checklist to give context to the clinical pathway, including questions patients may ask of their doctor and questions their doctor may ask of them. And if we have time, we can discuss that later as well. And I welcome any comment or update on that, really, from anyone from the patient group. Either you can speak later or put it in the chat or whatever. So this was the basic organization of the manuscript shown here. There's a definition. We talked about diagnosis, both radiographic, histologic, genetic. We talked about what we called staging of the disease, that is sort of determining the extent of a disease in an individual patient, both skeletal and extraskeletal. And then we spent a good bit of time on management. General measures is what we called, information about the disease for patients, families, doctors, lifestyle changes, exercise rehabilitation. And then we went into the management of very specific aspects of this. Those are shown here. So that was really the paper itself. And what I'd like to launch into now, unless there's any questions or comments in the chat, or if anyone wants to speak, I would like to launch into what we will be considering our 5-year mark assessment and planning for the next publication. Adrian, Natasha, anyone, are there any questions or comments in the chat?
So far, nothing, Mike.
Okay,
Nothing.
great. Thank you so much. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so as I said, we called for a sort of 5-year mark assessment and planning, and I think we're up to that now. I'm curious to know if there's a general consensus as to whether or not now or soon is good for the timing of that. I think a lot has occurred since the initial publication of this paper. I think we've learned a lot. I can think of some things that we might want to add to the paper. And we can maybe, I'm not sure how to handle this, whether or not there's a consensus that we should now do the 5-year update. I think there probably is a consensus that we should. I think if anyone thinks otherwise, maybe they can offer that up in the chat or something like that. Okay. And what I would call for in terms of this 5-year assessment is consideration of coupling this revision with the 2023 international meeting that we plan to have in Bethesda, Maryland. We're not quite ready to officially announce this. We're pretty certain that it will be on or around the weekend of September 9th to 10th, 2023 in Bethesda, Maryland. We should be able to nail that down more firmly within the next couple weeks, and we'll send out an announcement for that. But I think that would offer a good opportunity for us to get organized and begin to outline the group that will do the writing and how we'll organize the paper, etc. What I would also like to offer up as a consideration is that in addition to this guideline paper that we intend to publish another edition of, that we have manuscripts, separate manuscripts on basic and translational science and a paper on patient interests as well. I think those are obviously very important parts of this work. And the paper was quite extensive and fairly long as it was. And I think that to really do justice to including these topics in publication, that they would probably should be separate publications. But again, welcome any comments, questions about that. Again, this will be part of the discussion that will take place, and this is where I outlined a couple slides ago what the organization of the manuscript was. I think it was a good organization. I can think of some ways that it might be tweaked. And so there will be consideration for modification of the structure, and especially whether or not we want to have separate papers on basic and translational, or separate ones on patient interests as well. Again, I think I like the approach that we took before. The guideline development groups, if there are going to be more than one paper, we should talk about and have consideration for the process of member inclusion for that. We can revisit how that was done before. It's a more, we had 50 some people before considered. That was a lot. Probably Kasim and Allison can offer up if that might have been too much, or if it needs to be more. We have more people now. If we open this up for people to volunteer to be members of this, we will probably need to narrow it down, and I think probably not necessarily be able to include everyone who's interested in being involved. And then again, we'll have to talk about how to organize the guideline development group. As far as getting to the final version of this, I like the sort of Delphi type process that was conducted before, with rounds of revision and some cutoff for a consensus opinion of inclusion of 70% of those things that come up. Again, as I'm moving through this discussion, if there's any questions in the chat, please let me know.
So far not. Do you want people to invite to respond already, Mike, or do you want to?
Yeah, let me see what I have next. Yeah, why don't we do that? And I guess really sort of the first question I have is the notion of whether we should have a sort of triad of papers, one on the clinical guidelines, one on basic and translational research, and these will be really essentially review papers, and one on patient interests. Is there any feeling that this is a good idea, that this is something that would be good or essential, or something that would be not necessarily worth the effort? And you know, I could say, rather than necessarily putting in the chat, yeah, I think it might be a good idea for people to unmute themselves, and we can start an open discussion about it if there are any. Naveen.
Hello. Yes, I think it's a great idea. I think it's time to do it because, as you say, there's lots that's been happening over the last 5 years. I think it's essential to have the patient interest. We might combine the guidelines to include these two or have them separately. And I certainly think on the basic and translational side, we also have enough to actually report it as a review. So it wouldn't be part of the guidelines. But like we did for the first round, for the first guidelines, I think a patient-tailored guideline should also be done. So we could have a paper for patients, just layman terms, explain Fabry's dysplasia, talk about the guidelines, and then give them the guidelines, and not repeat that in the update of the guidelines, and have the translation one sort of separately.
Can I ask a question about, and I don't know the status of this separate patient checklist, and if that has been updated at all, how that's been circulated, has that been widely accessed to any of the patients who are on the call? Have they found it useful? If it's not useful, what do we need to do to make it more useful? And that, I think, Naveen touches on the point that you raised about the need for something more patient-centric in a practical way that they can use with their doctors.
Yeah, we have. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, no, Karin, I was going to say you and Martina are the best ones to answer this question.
So, but at the time that the guidelines were made official, we have worked together also. Together with Kasim also in developing the patient guide. And okay, I'll just say. And so that's what we developed in the English language. As far as the Dutch Patient Association is concerned, is that we've made the translation to the Dutch language for our patients, and we took also the liberty of translating it into the German language, because in Germany, so far, we are not aware of any patient association, and we are nearby, so we took the liberty of doing that. This is actively being used, being also spread amongst our patients, and also when they become member of an association, they will receive this booklet. It's a booklet which they can bring to their appointment, and digital copies are also made available online. And also we have as a tool from the consortium. So in the consortium house style and layout, we have also published a patient guide, which is available on the consortium website. So that's basic. And yeah, so as far as the Dutch community is concerned, we are using it actively.
Great. Do you know if can anyone from our Spanish group tell us if it's been translated into Spanish, and if so, if they found it useful?
Hi, everybody.
Hola.
This is
Hi, Diana.
Hi. Yes. Well, I think Nerea might also talk, but yeah, we have the Spanish Association has an excellent webpage, and I translated it to Spanish a long time ago. And well, I think that perhaps Nerea can answer to whether they found this useful, the patients. In general, I have the impression that it has been pretty useful, but Nerea, if you want to answer this.
Sí, efectivamente, se tradujo la guía médica al español y también ese documento que habláis para ayudar en las visitas médicas. Nosotros consideramos, y cada vez que un paciente contacte con la asociación, son dos documentos que son casi obligatorios para los pacientes. Y claro que son útiles porque esos documentos se entregan directamente tanto a los pacientes, y son los pacientes quienes entregan también a sus respectivos especialistas. Por lo tanto, es muy, muy útil. Y muchísimas gracias.
I heard muy.
So yeah, maybe I can translate. So
Please.
basically what Nerea is saying, that whenever a patient becomes member of the association, the association provides them with these documents, these guidelines, not only for themselves, but so they can also give them to their physicians, and they can follow these guidelines, because not that many physicians can understand English in Spain. So I mean, it's like part of the typical circuit that a patient would do, get these guidelines and checklist, and then when they visit their physician, they will give them the guidelines as well. And as far as they say, it has been extremely helpful in the evaluation and management of FD.
Thank you, Diana. I mean, part of the reason that I'm so interested in that part is to this question here as to whether or not we really need a separate paper on it, or should we dedicate our efforts to this document that has been used and seems to be pretty useful.
Yeah, so Mike, Kasim also made a comment in the chat where he asked, well, what would be the purpose for the patient interest paper to inform them about research outcomes, or indeed an updated FDMES burden score? So do you have any thoughts about that?
I think it was mostly along the lines of some of the things that were just discussed, that it was useful to them to know what testing they should get done, how to, I think that you have coming up later, Martine, I saw on your slides that there was a question, there was, I guess, kind of a complaint really from some of the patients that, you know, they get these tests done and they don't know, it's not explained to them why they're getting the test, what it means, what the result of it is. And so something along that line. So probably, I guess it really, that doesn't so much fit the format of a paper per se for the patients, but perhaps more maybe an expansion of the existing document that we have. So an update of that as well. And I see Chelsea has her hand up.
Yeah,
and Maria Louise Brandy as well. So
yeah, I think Maria was actually first. So
thanks.
Yeah.
Hi, Michael. Hi, all. So I believe that that's an interesting conversation regarding the revision of the guidelines. And I also think that guidelines, if we call these guidelines, they should follow actually a different type of organization in the work that we need to do. And if they are guidelines, they should be translated into official paths that the patients have to follow, that are recognized by the governments. So in order to do this, I believe that the next work that needs to be done, if we go into the guidelines planning, is to have also systematic reviews of what has been done in different areas. You, Michael, are right. So that is a process that is different what has been done in the past, and probably should be divided in different sections with questions that could be PICO questions on what we can answer in terms of PICO questions. It might be just few of the questions could be answered, but this would make guidelines a different type of product that eventually then can be translated into diagnostic and therapeutical pathways recognized by the governments. Otherwise, it's true that the patients have an instrument. It's true that doctors that don't know anything about this can know a little more. But if we do not translate this in something that practically becomes followed by doctors in general and finds the reimbursement by the governments, patients would be still without what they really need. That is certainly knowledge, but also management.
And funding.
Thanks, Maria Luisa.
So then,
Yeah.
Chelsea?
Yeah, thanks. I've been involved in a bone pain patient ambassador group for a few years now, and having spoken to many patient ambassadors and patient advocates, it's clear that patients with chronic diseases really want to advocate for themselves and for their ongoing treatment and their lives. And there's becoming a growing trend of patient advocacy groups actually publishing papers discussing what they want to see in both clinical and basic research. So I think it is actually very important to have another paper that perhaps patients with FD can actually voice their opinions and what they feel is necessary as well. So I'm actually really in support of sort of the trifecta of papers from that perspective.
I think everyone is waiting for my presentation later on.
Yeah.
Kasim, you also raise your hand?
Kasim, you're muted.
Sorry, I forgot I was muted. So following from Maria Luisa's comment, which is very good, there's probably two other areas, Mike, I'd want to explore. Number one is we created a checklist for patients, but maybe we should create a checklist or an example of an assessment form for doctors. Oh, share my video. Okay, fine. Yeah, so we could think about that, because often, I mean, the guidelines quite text heavy. And, you know, a sample assessment sheet for someone with FDMAS with boxes they could fill in might be useful, might help standardize things. But the other thing that was sort of an aspiration was to have 3 or 4 or 5 key data points that you as a center could assess for all the patients you see and use those data points to improve your service. So how often did you do this, or how often did you do that? Because often we overestimate how comprehensive we are as doctors, and it's often quite nice to have that data simply for service improvement. You could build that onto collecting data about patients, but I think it's a separate question. This is about showing how closely is your expert center delivering to the guideline, purely as a way so you can see where you need to improve and potentially ask for additional funding and resources so you could meet the guideline. So if you are deficient in one domain, you can point out that you're out of step with the international guideline, produce the data, and maybe that might produce your manager to give you some more resource.
Thank you, Kasim. I like that idea. You know, in the one of the other sort of review papers on this, which I'll point out in a minute here, was the paper that we've had 2 rounds of revisions now in gene reviews that had associated with that an algorithm of all the various aspects of the disease, and something like that. A lot of clinicians we've shared it with have found it very useful. Algorithms make it much simpler to follow disease, and that could easily be converted to a sort of checklist that we could have in here, perhaps simplified a bit with more or less trees in it. So yeah, I think that that's a good idea.
And what about a dashboard, Mike?
An online dashboard?
Well, you could submit your, we've got like natural history dashboards. We don't have any dashboards for how well is your expert center adhering to delivering on the guidelines. Bronze, silver, or gold. I'm happy to go for bronze in the NHS. That's all we can afford.
Well, that, I'm not sure how we would implement that, but I'm open to the idea, and it's the sort of thing, of course, and we could discuss in more detail when we come together in 2023. And I think this is good. I think this will allow us to have some discussion before we arrive there, and then have together when we arrive there as a group a very detailed set of topics, discussions that we want to narrow down and answer. And this could certainly be on that list.
Yeah, so there are no more questions in the chat, which we didn't address yet, I think.
Okay.
And I don't see any hands raised.
Okay. I just had a couple more things on this. We're doing well with time. So, and this is the idea of what journal we could consider publishing this in. And again, this is maybe getting into the details a bit, but it was interesting in looking over how well our paper had done, and considering that fact, it's quite possible, and I'll show you in a minute why I think that's the case, where we could really potentially have this published in a higher impact journal. I do like the idea of sticking with the Orphanet Journal of Rare Diseases. It only has an impact factor of 3.68, which these others that you'll see later can give you an idea of the context for patients of where that stands. And for the patients, the impact factor is a way to quantify how important your work is. This is important, especially for the investigators, because our worth in life, our funding, our lifeblood is derived from the impact of our work, and the impact of our work is in part derived from the quality, the impact factor of the journals that we talk in, publish in. The other point I like about the Orphanet Journal of Rare Diseases is that it's open access, and that means that anyone can access it anywhere, anytime for free, which is not the case with all of the journals. So that's an important consideration. Although most of the journals now do have their work open access relatively quickly, and for we at the NIH in the US, and I'm not sure if this is true for NHS or other funded organizations, we are required, and we retain the copyright to the work that we publish, and it's required that we make our publications open access. Oftentimes, depending on the journal, there's a delay, but it's an important consideration. I think the other thing that we can consider is higher impact journals. So one of the highest impact journals in our field is Nature Reviews Endocrinology. Its self-reported impact factor is 43. Lancet Diabetes and Endocrinology, its self-reported impact factor is 44.8. And just to give you an idea of where our publication stands in relationship to other publications, I went back to 2019 and just picked a few randomly articles from Nature Reviews Endocrinology and Lancet Diabetes. And you can see that these three articles, which were fairly similar to ours in some ways, were way less accessed than ours. Ours was accessed 48,000 times. That's really impressive, as compared to 5.5, 4.2. Our paper was cited 118 times as opposed to these citations in these journals. Lancet Diabetes Endocrinology is not quite as transparent with their metrics on their website. All I could get from papers around the same time as ours is the citations. But again, our paper was more heavily cited than those. And I should say that the number of citations of papers is what is very attractive to these higher impact journals. Again, as a bit of a way of comparison, these are other review articles on fibrous dysplasia McCune-Albright syndrome. This is the one by Allison and I in Endocrine Reviews. It only had 9.3 thousand views. It was cited 57 times. Oops, and that altmetric was 11, not 111. This was a similar paper in Gene Reviews, again by Allison and I. This, again, Gene Reviews is an odd journal, hard to track in some ways, but it is open access. And that has had 152 citations. Anyway, I just wanted to throw this out for consideration. We can have some discussion about this now, or we can save this discussion to later. I think some of us know some of the editors at these journals, and we could make inquiries as to whether or not they would be interested. I do think that the good metrics, the really good metrics that we have so far, these number of accesses, these number of citations, this altmetric, are really important for getting these higher impact journals to be interested in this and for sort of selling this. That's really all I had to say about consideration for the guidelines at this point. Are there any discussions or questions in the chat, or does anyone have anything to say?
In the chat so far, nothing
question.
about that, no.
But Naveen raised her hand, non-digitally. And Naveen, you need to unmute yourself. Naveen, you're muted.
Sorry, I just have one comment about the choice of journal. I think we need to find out how much update is going to be done on the guidelines. There is a lot of it probably, but it depends very much how much different this is going to be. And it would definitely be novel. So should we not wait to first have a screening of how much developed the new update is going to be?
That's a good question. I think it's the answer to the question probably it would be fairly detailed and would actually probably require a lot of discussion and input from the people writing. So I'm not sure how quickly we could come up with an answer to that, but I could be wrong if others have other ideas.
No, but I mean, as in the preparatory work anyway, it's going to be screening absolutely everything that's been published in the field, but not just that, because lots of stuff also isn't published that we could include as available data. It's not going to be hard data, but definitely it should have some weight in the update as well. Needs to be confirmed, as it were. So I think this preparatory work is going to be quite important before we can decide to go for the Orphanet Journal, because it's open access and we had such fantastic result there that apparently we're the most cited paper ever. And as opposed to something with a journal with a very high impact, but that might be or will probably much less read.
Yeah, I don't know. The Nature Reviews Endocrinology has published recently quite some guideline papers for achondroplasia, also for XLH. So I do think there's a clear interest there, and I do think when we're going to start on updating the guideline again, it will be at earliest 2023, 2024. We have many publications since. Yeah, so I think there will be enough to update, and also there will be definitely be very new stuff in there as well, considering the studies that have been published there and are going to be published anytime soon. So I think there's enough for that.
But if that's the case, so if we do decide already now to do that, should we not include there the basic and translational as well to base our
No, I wouldn't go for that, because then it will be too much. This paper was already many, yeah, because you have to go from pediatric to adult, from endocrinology to orthopedic to ENT to everything. So I think yeah, it really will be a very comprehensive paper again, and to include then basic and translational science as well. I don't think you give them the platform that part also deserves there, but that's basically what I think.
You got a point. Very good.
So what would be the way to go then from here to next year's meeting in Brescia?
Well, so one of the things I thought of is if we want to throw it open for people who want to volunteer to be part of the guideline development group, and depending on the response that we get, we could say, this is great, this is our group. If it's not big enough, we may need to, shake the tree a little and see if we could get more people interested. If there's an overwhelming response, it might be too many people. So my recommendation would be to throw open to the group, certainly the people here online and the rest of the group on the distribution list, that maybe I could put together a statement that we're beginning to develop the organization for this paper. And if you are interested, let us know that you have to be more than just interested. You will have to do some work, and that the work you'll have to do will include XYZ. And if you don't do the work, then Naveen will come after you. So
with her pencil.
So if we say that volunteers can send an email to the consortium. Okay, I'll put it in the chat.
Yeah, and Kasim also made a point, and he also raised his hand, so I'm going to shut up now.
Yeah, I think in addition to that, if people could say, actually this part is really missing from the original guidance based on the evidence. We've talked about, we really need to look carefully at the recommendations around cancer, recommendations around monitoring for liver and pancreatic lesions. There are some bits that we just did very light touch on in the first guidelines from basic lack of evidence. And you could almost think of a hot topics update. But actually, most of the stuff is the same, because the trial evidence is not so clear at the moment. And that will save you having to rewrite the whole thing,
right,
and get hit by plagiarism because you've just rewritten the paper, and the editor will go nuts thinking, hang on, I've got a plagiarism issue here. And you just say, actually, these are the hot topics, and then you can always refer to the old one. And we can probably put a rider on the old one if we stay in North.
I think we're only. No, I like that. I think we're only scheduled for 3 more minutes before we take a break. Martine, is that right? So
yeah, that's fine. I think two hands up. Yeah.
Maria Luisa is first, and then Naveen.
I believe that it's very important, Michael, that we have clear ideas on the structure of the manuscripts, because obviously you could have more than one. You can have one on diagnosis, one on management, just mentioned. You can have more papers, one on basic research, and so on. And when you connect with the editor, it's very important that you have clear the idea of what you want to do in terms of the type of products that you want to get out. Because for me, it's not clear yet if it would be a revision of the first manuscript with the same type of mechanism or different mechanisms. I strongly suggest, if possible, to include something that is a graded system, because we need something like this in guidelines, in any guideline that is called as such. And I also, as I wrote in the chat, can share the experience that we recently matured with the parathyroid disorders, where at least we were able at the end with 100 more people to get out manuscripts that are going at least to be there for the next 5 years with evidence-based conclusions. So my suggestion is still that actually this year could be served for preparing something, and eventually you can use the meeting for having the approval and discussion of what has been matured in this year. So the meeting could be another great asset, because you can have questions and still incorporate the questions from the participants. Could be patients or certainly experts in the field. So that's my vision for the experience I had for other guidelines that we wrote and we are writing now.
Thank you, Maria-Louise. Maria-Louise, I have to confess, I was having a hard time hearing all that you said, and I think what I'll do is communicate with you separately after this. We're almost, actually, we're out of time. So one quick question, comment from you, Naveen. You're muted. You need to unmute, Naveen.
I just want to highlight one notification in the chat. A pediatric surgeon asking for more details or guidelines for surgical management. So I think that's an area that we also need to develop, because again, we touched on it, but maybe we should go more in depth. That's
yeah, I agree. There actually was, I just looked again, we had surprisingly little on the orthopedic management, and actually a lot has been done. There's been a good organization amongst the orthopedic surgeons and good publications among the orthopedic surgeons, some of which included very specific recommendations. So I think that that's a good point. Yes. At that, since we're a minute or so over, I'll turn it back to you, Natasha or Naveen.
Yeah, so we have a short break now till for 15 minutes. In the meantime, I'm going to open some breakout rooms so people can have some sort of private chat in between. But you're also very welcome, like I said in the chat, just to go for a short exercise break, stretch your legs, get a cup of coffee, and then return quickly afterwards.
Maybe Natasha, it's still good, because in meantime, a lot of, indeed what Adriana puts on the screen right now is a lot of Spanish speaking people have joined the meeting during this morning, so, or since this morning. So there is an option to join the meeting in the Spanish language, because we have a translation option. So here's the explanation on how to approach this and how to use this function.
Yeah, so we will keep that slide on. Also, if you don't know how the breakout rooms work and you want to be in the room, just put it in the chat. I will monitor it and we'll put you in manually. So I had some requests also from the patient associations to get some people together in the chat. So I'm going to move somebody, some of you around, and otherwise just put me in the chat and I will get you to the right room. And you can either also choose and hop rooms if you want to. Yeah, so again, if you want to go to a certain breakout room, you can put it in the chat or just mute yourself and ask me to do so. And I can put you in, and you only have to press the yes button, of course, because otherwise you will not enter the room. Don't worry about getting out of the room, because I will close the rooms when we come back from the break. And then you're automatically again in the general meeting. So I closed all the breakout rooms. So everybody will be back automatically in the main meeting in 30 seconds so that we can proceed with the next presentation of the program.
Are we ready?
So, yeah, all the rooms are closed now.
Hey, Natasha, our breakout room just closed down.
Yeah, because it's 4:15. So we have to, we're going to.
Oh, I got it. I see.
Yeah.
So we could either take a break or we could chat, but we couldn't do both.
Well, it depends if you can do multitasking. So I was able to get
having breakfast in the breakout room.
I thought it was quite clear.
Yeah, I think so too. Thank you, Alison, for the support. Okay, so yeah, Martina,
You can have your breakfast during my my presentation, Mike. You just put yourself on mute if you do.
So I would like to introduce Martine Decker. She's done so very much for this consortium and is very much a driving force. She will now present an update on the International Patient Group. And I'd also like to remind everybody that there is interpreting available in English and Spanish. Martine?
Yeah, thank you, Adrian, for the introduction. I will try to share my screen. Please let me know if you can.
It's okay.
If you can see it.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, perfect. Okay, so yeah, thank you for the lovely introduction, Adrian. And yeah, today I will be presenting to you in name of all the international patient associations for FD-MAS. So a lot has changed since the last consortium meeting that we had in Florence in Italy. So I would like to give you an update of the developments of the last 3 years. Yeah, first of all, we have a growing number of advocacy groups, and even now in the last hour, I think we can add 2 countries again, so which is a very good thing. And obviously it's great that we have found each other through social media, our websites, and our online meetings that we have. Everyone is contributing within their own possibilities and capabilities, and that's just great. And the most important thing is that we work all together. So since the Florence meeting in 2019, we have had regular online meetings, now scheduled monthly. I don't know if you see this. Yeah, now scheduled monthly, where we have core group discussions about the various challenges that we come across. So you will understand that this can be very different per each country. But we have also found a lot of common ground, for instance, in determining the priorities of care. So this is what our monthly meetings look like. Sometimes challenging to find the right hour and the right time, being in China and the US and Europe simultaneously, but we manage every now and then, and everyone who's able to join does join, and this way we come a far way. So as indicated, we have found a common ground in determining the internationally supported priorities. And all attending advocacy groups send out a poll to their members or patients asking the following questions. What do you think is the best possible care you may expect as a FD-MAS patient? And from their answers, we have been able to determine a list of priorities, which we would like to share with you today. So the answers coming from the patients have stated the following priorities. So the first 3 are on this slide. Pain treatment and identification of different pain types of pain related to FD-MAS So patients are still often confronted with the situation that their pain is not recognized or not taken seriously and not seen in relation with FD-MAS. So this is an important priority to be recognized as a patient and to be taken seriously. Cooperation between departments and hospitals, both locally and across the world, aiming to have a one appointment multidisciplinary team and also cooperation between experts internationally. For instance, if a specific hospital in a specific country doesn't have the required information that he needs, he can contact another expert from another country to discuss. And this obviously can also be achieved with the help of the consortium, being the center of contact for specialists also. Next priority, communication with patients, and mostly about clarity about which tests are ordered and why. Well, I think we've had quite already an extensive discussion about this when Mike had his talk. So indeed, we recognize the importance to promote the clinical pathway and the use of the patient guide. And it's just very important to give clarification and advice towards the patient, more information, and explain about the treatment and why. So as was already stated, we have the patient guide, a checklist for patient and doctors. This is just a screenshot of the form that can be found on the consortium website. Basically, the checklist has three parts. Questions that you can ask about your diagnosis as a patient, questions that you should ask as a patient to help plan your care. And a third part basically is questions that you may expect your doctor to ask you. And if your doctor does not ask you those questions, then that should be like a bit red light alert that maybe you're not at the right doctor, at the right appointment, and you need to find some help within the consortium or another specialized hospital. So this way the patient guide can be used. Why can I? Yeah. So some other priorities that were identified by patients is psychological support. So making the psychological aspect of FD-MAS a very important part of care and research. This is often overlooked and often very much missed by the patients in today's focus. And an easier path to diagnosis. And this also remains a big issue, as the right diagnosis can still take too much time and too long, with often traumatic roads to follow until the right diagnosis is received. By educating doctors and more research on bone tumors, we should be able to easier the path to diagnosis. So besides the patient's priority list, which I just mentioned, we have another 4 items added from the advocacy groups that we think is important. To improve and advance research. So biobanking and encouraging biosample collection could make a difference, into our opinion. And also perhaps we can gain from coordinating with related diseases. And elevate newer research centers and clinicians. The consortium should make space to researchers new to the group also to present their work and share their progress. And I think this is just one of the added values of the consortium, by having more specialists joining and by learning from each other and expanding instead of working in the same groups and the same people. And the final 2 priorities we have identified are the education of doctors, so encouraging experts to present and speak about FD-MAS within their networks. And obviously we could be working together as patient associations with you on that, with also involving patient stories, etc. and also for specialists to provide opportunities for mentorship and fellowships for the education of doctors. And then this is basically what we see a responsibility for our own advocacy groups is to provide easy to share explanations for children and teachers, like animation or presentation kits, or here the children's book Mateo, which was a great initiative by our Spanish colleagues, and also published in various languages, and obviously with the purpose for integration and inclusion of children in the school environment, in free time and also other activities. So these priorities represent areas of concern and hopes for improved care share by all FDMS patient groups. And today we have addressed the list of priorities that I mentioned to a letter to all consortium members with the request to focus on these priorities in their future initiatives. And the letter will be sent out to all participants of this meeting and will also be shared online on the various associations websites, and also will be shared on the webpage of the consortium. So next to the list of priorities, we also organized an international coordinated campaign for the FDMAS Global Awareness Week earlier this year, which was in the 20th to the 27th of February, running up to the International Rare Disease Day under the hashtag This Is My Rare. And I will share a small video with a compilation of all the images that we so I hope I have been able to show you that the FDMAS patients are united and more, but we still have a lot to cover over the globe, as you can see here. So thank you. And any further contact details from all of us of the core group of patient associations can also be found on the presentation. I think all presentations will be shared on our website as well for later on. So if you have any questions, please let me know.
Yeah, so Maria Luisa raised her hand. So Maria Luisa. So I can see that you're unmuted yourself, but we cannot hear you. Okay, so there appears to be some problem with the audio.
Sound.
Yeah. In the meantime, Martina, can you answer the question from Gabi? Would it be a good idea to publish the outcomes?
Oh. would it be a good idea too?
To publish the outcomes of the polls and data that you just presented, Martina.
Yeah, well, that's a bit difficult, obviously, because everyone had their own way of sharing or this poll. So we don't have the actual numbers. And so basically what we did is identified the outcome in a meeting and just identified the common ground, so to say. So the highest priorities, and that we put in place.
Okay, so we can try again.
Can you hear
Yeah.
me now?
Yes,
Yes.
better.
So I wanted to just congratulate, because you did a great job, and you put together very important issues that we certainly should follow. The one of pain is so important. If I can have a suggestion, one area that you can certainly work as an association or a group of association is to develop a questionnaire for quality of life, if it's not done already, because that is going to become very useful also in the future. So doing something today where we do not have a fully dedicated therapy to this disease, it can be so useful for the future when eventually drugs will become available. And for our experience, anything you do in rare disorders should be personalized for the disorder. So developing a questionnaire fully dedicated to FD and MS, and it could be important to have a quality of life tested today. And so that's something that all the patient association, I see that they engage with a lot of strength and also power and knowledge. So if I can give you this as a suggestion, if you have not done this already.
Yeah, if I speak for my own association, we have not done this because this is extensively done by the Leiden University Medical Center. In Holland, all FD-MAS patients are very much used to filling in very extensive questionnaires of quality of life, but Natasha can maybe tell a bit more about that.
Natasha, for my knowledge, there is not one dedicated fully to FD. So I don't know if you have something like this that should merit to be extended worldwide.
No, so there is not a disease-specific questionnaire at the moment. So we're working with the general ones, but it's quite difficult to have one disease-specific questionnaire on fibrous dysplasia, because you will have to address all the different items. And what we already saw in our quality of life studies that we did here, and I think Alison saw the same, is that patients with craniofacial fibrous dysplasia have different complaints and different outings than the people who just have monostotic lesions in their femur, for instance. So of course your looks are more affected when you have craniofacial fibrous dysplasia, and we also do see there a change in the outcomes of quality of life. So it appears to be, if you have very severe craniofacial fibrous dysplasia, these people have a worse quality of life, and also when you have a very severe disease, of course, that the quality of life also gets influenced. So it's difficult just to make one questionnaire. So that's why they need to fill out that many, because we're using different ones, also just on general ones, but also on social interactions, work participation. So I don't know what's your thought, Alison, about that.
No, I totally agree. I think it's just such a challenge when there's such a broad range of disease severity. And it's compounded by how rare the disease is. So to fully address all the concerns ranging from someone with panostotic disease affecting their entire skeleton, all the way to maybe monostotic FD affecting only one bone, you would really need very large numbers to ensure you're doing that properly. And in particular, the risk you could run would be underrepresenting the patients with the most severe disease, because there aren't as many of them. But at the same time, that's arguably where maybe the largest treatment gap is. So you would really want to avoid underrepresenting them. So not saying it's impossible, I just think it would be a very big undertaking. And you'd want to be careful you did it properly to really represent everybody.
We did something similar for hypoparathyroidism, where we have a similar condition with a lot of different symptoms, different patient by patient. At the end, it was developed a questionnaire that has been mostly concentrated on the disorder, then using just 3-4 different questionnaires. So that's the reason for which I was suggesting this as an area that could be developed, because it's not impossible, might be difficult, but it's not impossible. It can become an instrument very important later on, eventually when a therapy will come out. It's
Yeah,
just a suggestion.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mike, I think.
So for one final question, because then the time is running out.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ayman. I'm from Cairo, Egypt. Yes, can you hear me, right?
Yes,
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, first, I would like to thank you for being there. I'm already participated in this group since 1 year. My daughter had the FDMS in skull bone and occipital lesions. So I'm very happy being part of this group and sharing our disease and knowledge together. I have one suggestion from my side. I don't know if it's applicable or not, that we can collect all of these FD warriors in one group, like WhatsApp group or Telegram group. You know, sometimes I'm losing some data using the Facebook and the website. So at the end, our mobiles in our hands. So being all the warrior collecting from all over the world in one device. So we have a WhatsApp group in this FD warriors, or even Telegram, to sharing data, to asking some question. No one has any committed to answer a question. Just sharing the data between each other would be good. This is my suggestion.
Yeah, maybe Aman, you can also use either maybe that's the easiest, the email address of the consortium, and that will arrive at TOVAS, and then maybe it's a good thing you will be included in the mailing list for the patient associations.
I already added myself. And already
okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And if this is Tova here, I just want to add, if connecting with other FDMAS parents or patients in the community is a priority, there is a very active independent Facebook group. I know it's not everyone's platform of choice,
Yes.
but that is a really an active place. So encourage you, if you haven't, it's a private group, but if you ask to join.
I already in this group. I'm just asking, because at the end, the WhatsApp and these groups in our mobile device is much easier to find information, to ask a question, easier than the Facebook. But at the end, if it's not applicable, I'm already in the Facebook.
Okay, I'm glad to hear it.
Okay, yeah. So I would like to thank Martina for her presentation. I think considering the aspect of time, that we need to continue with Alison.
But can I finalize one thing, because I think also from the chat, what Maria Luisa started as quality of life, and also from the chat, I think this is quite an important matter to have like a quality of life questionnaire. So maybe this is something also that we can put on the agenda for next meetings, and maybe also to develop this.
Okay.
Would that be an item?
Shall I make the introduction?
Yeah.
So Dr. Alison Boyce is an NIH endocrinologist specializing in bone and mineral metabolism, and she's a Lasker Clinical Research Scholar. Her work focuses on rare and pediatric diseases, including fibrous dysplasia, McCune-Albright syndrome, and disorders of fibroblast growth, factor 23. She has held current and previous faculty positions in the NIH Pediatric Oncology Fellowship Training Program and Children's National Hospital. She is active in the patient advocacy community and works closely with the FDMAS Alliance as the chair of our medical advisory committee. It's an honor to introduce Alison.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction, Adrian, and for inviting me to speak on this. Is everyone able to see the slides?
Yes.
Great. Okay, so I'll be sharing some updates on our clinical trials in FDMAS at NIH and because we have had a fair bit of movement on this over the past few years. And I did just want to start by acknowledging we're certainly not the only group involved in clinical trials in FD. And I was hoping that perhaps if I could move through this quickly, we may have time to discuss some of the other very nice work being done in France and Leiden and other places, but we'll see how we are doing on time. But so for the next few minutes, my goal is to really share data on or thoughts on 3 studies that are either in progress or upcoming. The first is our adult denosumab study, which is wrapping up, and 2 upcoming studies, a pediatric denosumab study and a study of burosumab. And I just want to disclose that we are receiving support from Amgen, Ultragenyx, and Kyowa Kirin for this work. So just briefly, to give folks a background, denosumab focuses on this pathway called RANKL. It's receptor activator of nuclear kappa B ligand. It's a protein that's expressed by bone forming cells. It binds to cells that break down bone called osteoclasts and helps promote their activation. And we have a lot of data that RANKL may be involved in the in the disease process in FD. So we see high RANKL levels in patients' blood who have fibrous dysplasia, and these levels correlate with how much disease somebody has. We see high levels of RANKL expression in FD tissue. You can see here by these stained dots. And the expression particularly seems to be high in areas where the cells are very active and proliferating, so where the cells are dividing. So based on that, we hypothesize that if we can target RANKL, if we can decrease its activity using this medication called denosumab, that will help us treat FD, that will make FD cells less active and help improve the quality of the lesions. And again, this is a commercially available medication that's been approved for other disorders like osteoporosis and other bone tumors. So this is our phase 2 trial of denosumab in adults with fibrous dysplasia. It involved a 6-month treatment period where patients received high-dose denosumab every month. A very tricky thing about denosumab is when you stop it, although while you're on treatment, bone activity is very low. When the drug stops, bone activity can go very high, and that's called rebound bone turnover. And in rare cases, this can be serious and associated with problems like high blood calcium levels. So because of that, we designed the trial to have a very extended monitoring period after the drug is stopped. So that went up to 26 months total. So our primary endpoint, or our main endpoint on this study, was what happens to bone turnover markers in the blood. And we had a number of secondary endpoints too. So we looked at how active FD lesions are on imaging scans. We did biopsies of FD lesions before and after treatment. And of course, safety is always very important to look at. So these were the characteristics of our subjects on the study. 9 subjects were enrolled and 8 finished the treatment. The average age was 26 and all the subjects were female. We tried very hard to recruit some men, but they weren't as willing to participate. And we had a very broad range of disease severity. So skeletal burden score is just a number that measures how much FD someone has. It ranges from 0, which is no FD, to 75, which is your whole skeleton being involved. And we had patients ranging everywhere from only a monostotic lesion to almost panostotic FD. And most patients had endocrine features of McCune-Albright syndrome, the most common being autonomous ovarian activity, which is just another way of saying precocious puberty. So we saw a very profound effect on our primary endpoint, which was the bone turnover markers in the blood. This marker here, P1NP, is a marker of bone formation. Our best guess is that this is one of the markers that reflect what the FD cells themselves are doing. And we see that it really came down dramatically, into the normal range in almost all patients, so a 92% decrease. CTX is a bone resorption marker. It reflects what the cells that break bones down are doing, the osteoclasts. And we really expected to see an effect here. And as such, we did. We saw a median of a 62% decrease. So we're quite happy to see this. We saw very dramatic effects on FD lesion activity as measured by sodium fluoride PET scans. So this is a type of imaging tool where you can combine what's called functional imaging, which quantifies how active FD lesions are, with anatomical imaging, which gives you a CT scan so you can actually look at the lesion itself. And previous work has shown that that these are really good scans that correlate with outcomes we care about in FD. So function, ambulation, how many surgeries and fractures patients have, et cetera. And on these scans, when you inject tracer into the bone, essentially the darker the uptake looks, the more active the FD is. And you can see we saw just really huge decreases in FD lesion activity to, in many patients, almost to the level that we see in normal bone. So this was also really encouraging. So again, safety is extremely important. All subjects were given supplements with calcium and calcitriol to protect against low blood calcium levels. 6 patients had mild to moderate hypocalcemia, which in all cases was able to be managed with oral supplements. 1 subject had to be withdrawn after the first dose of denosumab due to the development of really prolonged hypocalcemia. And this was attributed to previously unrecognized partial hypoparathyroidism that really seemed to be unmasked by denosumab. So it's kind of an unusual situation. When denosumab was stopped, all subjects were given a zoledronate infusion 4 weeks after the last dose, and then additional infusions were given as needed. And we monitored labs every 4 weeks after stopping denosumab for the first 3 patients. After we saw a case of hypercalcemia in between that interval, we then increased our monitoring to every 2 weeks. And this is our post-discontinuation data. So out of the 8 subjects, 4 of them had a rebound in their CTX or bone resorption marker to levels that were higher than pre-treatment. Of those 4 patients, 3 of them actually experienced hypercalcemia or high blood calcium levels. In 2 of the patients, the hypercalcemia was mild and asymptomatic, but in 1 patient, it was extremely, extremely severe, actually one of the highest calcium levels I have ever seen. This patient had very severe FD involving most of her skeleton. So she had to be hospitalized and she was treated with IV fluids, with bisphosphonates and with more denosumab. And fortunately, she completely recovered and she did not have any sequela of this, but it was a very serious event. So in conclusion, from this study, we feel that denosumab may provide clinical benefit in patients with FD or in adults with FD by decreasing lesion activity, and that the treatment itself was very well tolerated. It was associated with mild to moderate hypocalcemia, but that it was manageable with oral medications. However, vigorous post-discontinuation bone turnover rebound does appear to occur in a subset of patients, and it does have the potential for life-threatening hypercalcemia. So we feel that further study is needed to determine the clinical utility of denosumab, and this is particularly true in children, which is the period during which FD is becoming established and during which lesions are progressing. So based on this data, our next steps were to design a trial of denosumab as a preventative treatment in children. So again, this is justified due to the fact that we know that FD lesions expand during childhood and when patients reach their final amount of FD around early adulthood. So no new lesions will appear and lesions should not expand after that time period. And there's really some beautiful work from Dr. Romanucci's lab using mouse models of FD, where if we give anti-rankle treatment, you can actually prevent the development of these lesions in the young mice. So again, this gives us a window where we can potentially intervene and have a very large impact on patients' disease course. So to get ready for this, we performed preparatory studies because we wanted to identify which children are the best candidates for this treatment. We wanted to characterize how FD lesions develop and identify kind of biomarkers and clinical predictors that will help us select or identify the kids who are going to be at risk for more severe FD. And so this was a project that was recently completed using natural history data from our study at NIH. We had 31 children who had undergone serial bone scans over the past few decades. And using these bone scans, we're able to quantify something called skeletal burden score. And this graph just shows you how we do that. It basically is a number assigned to how much FD a patient has, and you divide the skeleton into different quadrants and you score them based on how much FD is there. So using these serial scans, we were able to calculate FD progression rate, or how much does the skeletal burden change over a 1-year period. And these are some of the patterns that we looked at. We saw that the FD progression rate declines as children age. It's the highest in the younger kids and then gradually decreases up until adolescence. We saw that FD progression is highest in children who have moderate disease. So if a child is starting out with a skeletal burden scan or score in the moderate category, so a score of 16 to 30, which is about 10 to 25% of your skeleton being involved, those kids went on to have the highest increase in skeletal burden score. Kids who already have severe disease, so the skeletal burden score of greater than 50, didn't progress very much at all. And that's to be expected. If most of your skeleton is involved, you wouldn't, there's not much room for the lesions to expand into. So we looked at a bone turnover markers, including a level called osteocalcin. This is another blood marker that shows how active FD cells are. And we saw that osteocalcin levels at baseline were pretty well correlated with how much progression kids were going to go on to have subsequently. So it seemed to be a predictor of disease progression. So putting this all together, we think that the optimal time to treat kids is probably younger, probably ideally less than age 8 when they have their highest progression rates. The optimal kids to treat are probably those who already have moderate FD burden. We think osteocalcin might be a helpful biomarker to identify the kids who may be at risk to go on to have more highly progressive disease, and that this is data that may be useful in guiding the development of clinical trials and future treatment guidelines. So based on this, we have developed a phase 2 trial of denosumab in children. It's going to be 15 patients, ages 4 to 14. It's an open label trial. We'll be giving a very low dose of denosumab, and we'll be giving it once a month for a 1-year period. And then there's again a really extensive post-discontinuation monitoring period. We do have the option, if we need to restart denosumab if patients are experiencing clinical benefit from it. And in this study, our primary endpoint is going to be the change in skeletal burden score compared to untreated children from our natural history study. So some of the historical controls I just showed you from the previous study. So this has actually been approved by the IRB, and we are hoping to start enrolling really within the next 6 to 8 weeks. So that's exciting. And then the third trial, I'll just touch base on quickly. So this is a trial focused on low blood phosphorus levels in FD. And that happens because FD overproduces a hormone called FGF23. It's a hormone that's made by bone cells, and it acts on the kidney to lead to low serum phosphate levels in the blood and low activated vitamin D levels, which these are levels that are both really important to maintain healthy bones. And we care about this because we know that hypophosphatemia is one of the factors that really increases skeletal problems in patients with FD. Patients who have hypophosphatemia have more fractures, earlier fractures, more pain. They have more deformities. We see this in the skull-based deformities. They have more scoliosis. So it's a really important problem. There's really two pathways to treat low blood phosphorus in fibrous or in general. The most common method is called conventional therapy. This involves trying to replace the hormones that are not being processed well. So you give patients oral phosphate and you give them active vitamin D because those are the things that are low in their blood. It's really not the best treatment regimen because unfortunately the oral phosphate has to be given really frequently, 3 to 5 times per day, and it causes a lot of GI symptoms. The active vitamin D can cause high urine calcium and can lead to kidney problems. So using this approach, really the best you can hope for is maybe to squeak the phosphorus into the lower part of the normal range. You cannot fully treat the hypophosphatemia. There's a newer treatment, burosumab. So this is an antibody that binds up the excess FGF23. So it's a really intuitive treatment. And it's been studied in 2 other disorders of FGF23 excess, so X-linked hypophosphatemia and tumor-induced osteomalacia. And there's really beautiful data from these disorders that burosumab can normalize serum phosphorus, get it right into the middle or even high part of the normal range. It improves muscle function and heals fractures. So it's a really exciting treatment. It's very safe in XLH and tumor-induced osteomalacia, but it's not been studied in FD. We don't know what kind of effect it might have on FD lesions. It's extremely expensive, and it's really not something that's not very accessible to the population of patients with FD. So we will be conducting a phase 2 trial of burosumab in patients with FD. Again, we'll enroll 15 patients, open label, and it will include both kids and adults. Our primary endpoint is going to be to try to get this phosphorus not just in the lower part of the normal range, but we want to completely normalize it. We want to get it into the high part of the normal range because we hypothesize that fibrous dysplasia is at higher risk from low blood phosphorus levels than other bones because the FD lesions themselves are dysplastic and they're already vulnerable to complications. So we really want to treat this phosphorus well. And secondary endpoints, of course, safety, functional parameters. And this study has been submitted to the IRB. And again, we are hoping that we will be able to start enrolling this fall. So I just want to say thanks to our NIH bone team, our NIH clinical center collaborators, and of course, all our patients and families. So thanks very much. And I'm happy to take questions if there's time.
Thank you very much, Alison. I think there definitely will be time for questions. Let me scroll over the chat. I already saw one, which was a bit above. Oh, here, yeah. So there's a question in the chat who wants to know if you use the latest genomic analysis to understand which patients reacted poorly on the denosumab treatment.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it speaks to a larger issue of that we've sort of touched on already about how broad the disease is and how you always have to consider that when both deciding who to treat and to see what responses. Based on the data that I shared, the bone turnover markers and the FD lesion activity, we actually saw a response from everybody. It seemed to be extremely consistent. That might not be the case for other endpoints. We just don't know yet. I think one in particular is pain. Of course, there's a lot of interest in using denosumab to treat pain. I think there we might see more disparity between patients. I suspect may relate to why the patient is having pain. There's so many possible causes of pain in FD, and some of them may respond beautifully to denosumab and others may not. So that would be the first thing I would think of. Genomics is definitely something to consider too, because everyone has, although FDMAS arises to pretty consistent changes in the genes, people have all other genes that are forming the rest of their body that are obviously quite different. So that's certainly something we could consider. But I think we're still fairly early in the denosumab journey. And I think we first need to define who responds to what and what are we actually trying to treat.
Yeah. Another question from the chat was concerning the radiation that you do with serial bone scanning. Do you think that the radiation at this young age might be too much? And do you think that findings in bone scans without changes in patient symptoms influence clinical management?
No, very good question. And it sort of speaks to some of the goals that inspired our clinical pathway. So most of the data on the bone scans that I showed, the natural history data in particular, that was done, starting in the late 90s up and over several decades when there really weren't clinical guidelines to determine when we should do bone scans in patients. At that point, there was no data on how FD lesions progress. And I think our practice has evolved over time. I think it's part of what makes this historical data so incredibly valuable, because at this point, knowing that lesions change slowly, we certainly would not be doing yearly bone scans in children anymore. So that data is really our only chance to see how lesions progress on an annual basis in kids. So, our current practice for how often to do bone scans is still evolving too. Technetium scans, we tend to get one at the time of staging and we don't repeat them again, which I think is what's in the pathway. Sodium fluoride PET-CT is a newer technique. It gives us a lot more information about how active the lesions are. And I think we just still need to get more information about how to use it and how often to get them.
So Pedro, you also had a question?
Yeah, it's a little question, just it's an amazing presentation for Alison. I'm from Brazil and to patients too. And sometimes I'm patient and my alkaline phosphate is high and sometimes it's not. And I don't know what's the normal range for your study in the bone team in the United States, just to see, because some doctors here in Brazil talk, oh, your phospholine alkaline phosphate is so high. I thought, okay, I know I'm fibrous dysplasia patient. It's all the time since I was like 2 years old. I monitor it, but I don't know what's the normal range for fibrous dysplasia patients. I don't know the normal range for normal people, but for us it's a little high. I just need to know it because sometimes the doctors here in Brazil talk about biophosphate and the normal treatments, but it's not the same for us here. And I'm just to clarify it to talk to our patients here in Brazil.
Yeah, I think you're bringing something up, Pedro, that affects a lot of patients with FD. So, we see these high bone turnover markers in the blood, and we have normal ranges, but we don't know how to apply those ranges to patients with fibrous dysplasia. And it's kind of what I was mentioning when we were talking about scans, we're talking about osteocalcin. It's all part of searching for something called biomarkers. So we want to know, are there levels we can follow easily to see what the FD is doing and to see whether or not we're impacting it and making it better. And alkaline phosphatase is one of those, but I think part of the confusion you're running into with doctors is no one really knows exactly how to use it and how specific it is. So that's what a lot of, I think, both us and a lot of the other groups here have been focused on, is trying to find better markers. And it's part of why we're excited about these scans in the clinical trials, because they really show you beautifully what each FD lesion is doing. But it's not so practical, of course. We don't want everyone running out and getting a scan with radiation, every time you want to check in on your FD. So a lot of work still to do.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Alison, for your very, very beautiful presentation. There are many, many questions. So I would like to ask you if you could answer some of the questions in the chat. And I would like to point out that I will put you in the research room later on. So when we have a breakout room, so that any more questions that might come into somebody's mind can be asked later onwards in the breakout room, just to take the time into account. So I give the floor back then now to Adrian.
I'm back. So I trust we're going to forego our short break, and we're going to move and I'll introduce Dr. Natasha Appelman Dijkstra to update us about the EURR bone registry and the disease specific module.
Yeah, so thank you very much. And we decided on to skip the short break because it was only 10 minutes in order to be on time. And we will open the breakout rooms later on, definitely after the last presentation. I assure that you can see my screen at the moment, I think.
Yes.
And then in full presentation mode, I hope.
Yes.
All right, perfect. Yeah, because I'm seeing all kinds of things flowing in because of the fact that I'm also the host, of course, of the meeting. Yeah, this presentation is going to be on the fibrous dysplasia McCune-Albright disease-specific module that we currently have developed in the European Registry for Rare Bone and Mineral Conditions. So to give you an introduction about the registry, because this is, of course, not known to everybody, is that the European Union, European Committee, has decided on taking to take on the improvement of treatment and care for patients with rare conditions. And for such, in 2017, the so-called European Reference Networks for Rare Diseases were founded. So there is a European Reference Network for rare bone conditions, but also a European Reference Network for rare endocrine conditions. And of course, as many of you know, fibrodysplasia Meckel-Albright syndrome is an overlapping disorder where people might present into the endocrine part when they present, of course, with precocious puberty of growth hormone excess. But it can also be seen, of course, firstly with a fracture or with a skeletal dysplasia where they might present in an orthopedic surgery clinic and then perhaps into the rare bone reference network. So these reference networks were founded by the EU in combination with healthcare providers and patients and carriers of for the diseases. So because of the fact that these European reference networks were very important to improve the care, one of the things that the European Committee decided on doing so is to establish registries for rare diseases. The European Reference Network for Endocrinology has Eureka, which is the European Registries for Rare Endocrine Conditions, and the European Reference Network for Rare Bone Diseases has YourBone, which is the European Registries for Rare Bone and Mineral Conditions. And then we have these various thematic groups. As you can see in the last slide, last one, there's a specific thematic group for calcium phosphate, but also for bone conditions. And there's, of course, where the fibrous dysplasia Meckel-Albright module is situated at the moment. So the reason that I'm presenting this is because I'm the coordinator for the European Registries for Rare Bone and Mineral Conditions, and as such also the coordinator for the FDMES module. So the structure of YourBone is good to mention shortly. It's an open access project funded by the European Committee, where of course there are some mandatory work packages about management and coordination of the registry, which is currently being done by Leiden University Medical Center in collaboration with the University of Glasgow, which is leading the European Registry for Rare Endocrine Conditions. And within the European YourBone, we have 4 thematic groups specifically designed on the various diseases. As you can see here, the first one is the fibrous dysplasia Meckel-Albright group. We have a certain group for osteogenesis imperfecta, for rare phosphate disorders, and also one for achondroplasia. And one of the outcomes of this disease-specific modules and this disease-specific module groups is not only to collect clinical reported outcomes, but also to report on and develop patient-reported outcomes and patient-reported outcome measures. So how is the registry work? So the registry, where you have a patient with a bone or mineral condition, the patient can enter 2 platforms. Either the EREC, this is the e-reporting of rare endocrine and rare bone conditions. It's a clinician-only platform, so only the new confirmed cases or suspected cases of a disease are being annotated there by the clinician. So that basically answers the question, how many cases does a center see? And it contributes on the continuous monitoring of ERNs, but it also helps us to identify expert centers, especially if we're looking, for instance, for patients who want to contribute to a clinical trial or for other different kinds of things. It does not need patient consent, and only the clinician can access it. So the other option is the core registry. It's a clinician and patient guided registry. There, any encounter can be included there. And it does, of course, require informed consent, and the disease-specific of the condition-specific modules are part of the core registry. So far, within the EREC, we have 150 new cases for fibrous dysplasia and 9 centers that are reporting at the moment. And 40 new cases of Meckel-Albright syndrome, with 12 centers reporting on this specific condition. And these are data gathered in the last 18 months to 20 months in the European Union. Since Eurobone is open also for centers outside the European Union, we also are collecting data and are in contact with healthcare providers from, for instance, from Israel, but also from other countries from the world. So it's not absolutely necessary to be located within the EU to contribute to this registry. If we then go back to the core registry, there the clinician and patient questions can be filled out, and these basically answer the questions. So what are the baseline characteristics of the patients? How are patients diagnosed? And we collect a certain amount of common data elements that are there for many other conditions as well. It allows a basic collection of data, clinical care, which can be used by benchmarking in the future, but it also collects patient outcomes. So in general, we're collecting their mobility data for patients with a rare bone condition, and also general quality of life measured with EQ5D. So how can you participate as a patient and also let your patients participate as a clinician? So for participating in the core registry, you need to have, of course, a working protocol, and the patient needs to give informed consent. The protocols can be found on the website on the different languages that are currently already using the core registry. So whenever there's a new country with an approved protocol, we put it up there so everybody can use it, and it can help you with getting informed consent and getting everything approved by ethical board. Once the clinician has registered the patient, you can save, of course, the registry ID in your local file for identification, and you can provide access to the registry for the patient. These are the general things that we would like to know. Of course, we will want to know in which disease type your patient is in. So we also have asked some questions about the gender, the country where the patients live in, if the patient is still under active control, and of course the level of consent that your patient has provided you. And when you select and provide access to the patient, we can also send out an email with the registration link so the patient can access his own data. If you then hop on to the, for instance, here is the calcium phosphate, but we also have one, of course, that looks the same for bone dysplasia. We collect a minimal data amount about the kind of disease that the patient has. So for instance, when you have fibrous dysplasia or McDonnell syndrome, you can select it over there, on how the diagnosis was being made. And also if the patient is participating in another disease-specific registry, because we not aim to duplicate any existing disease registries. So we're there to be an addition rather than competitive. And if you have then selected that your patient is going to be there, you see here that the patient access button comes in. And also when you select fibrous dysplasia or McDonnell syndrome, the disease-specific module will automatically open. You can provide patient access with a personal email. So we've made a certain box there that the clinician can put down a message explaining, again, of course, because the patient will get an email for registering the specific introductions to the registry again, and also in their native tongue, so that there will be no so everything will be clear for the patient that it's not spam email, but just a serious email from the clinician that just spoke to. And then an email will be sent with a link and the user account can be created. Of course, since we're collecting specific data, two-factor identification is necessary. So we also ask people, the clinicians and the patients, to install an Authenticator app, which helps them use to get into the registry. And one of the main advantages, I think, not for in every country, but in many countries might be that patients can access all their data. So also when you're changing doctors or changing countries even, you will have access to your own data at any time, at any place, and you can also download it and use it for your personal interest. So what are we collecting? We already discussed briefly before quality of life. So for instance, here we're collecting EQ5Ds, not only in bone dysplasias and in fibrous dysplasia, but in many of the other conditions as well. The reason that we use EQ5D is because it's free of charge. and available in many languages. And of course, when we're doing an international, European, and even beyond registry, you have to take into account that you have to, if you're going to use prompts, these prompts need to be present in many languages, because otherwise you're not consistent in recovering your data. So that's the reason we chose the EQ5D. And also the additional questionnaires that we are using. We make sure that they are free of charge, but also that many languages are available. And if not, we're looking for possibilities to have them translated to be as inclusive for as many countries and languages as possible. So once you're in the core registry, you registered your patient, and the patient also has filled out, because they can do the patient-reported outcomes themselves. We made sure that there's a notification by email to the clinician. So whenever a patient also decides on adding something to the registry, there's a notification that there's new information. So then the clinician can also log on and see what has been entered by the patient, to make sure that if the patient reports a very bad quality of life, or for instance, we're also doing brief pain inventories, that a high pain score is being added, that is not overlooked, because we want to make sure that everything that we collect is being used in clinical practice. So these are mainly the generic ones. We also are developing, of course, condition-specific questionnaires and condition-specific modules. And it works with the fact that we have study groups with a specific interest, which need to consist of patients, but and carers, clinicians, and also researchers. They have to come together, and there has to be some consensus on the variables. And then we identify what's needed, and we get the variables there, and we build the data version, and then we can test it and we publish it on the website, and then it's open access for everybody to use. You only have to register for the registry. So these are, for the instance, for the 4 disease-specific modules that we're currently developing, and 3 of them are already active now. So we currently have a module for achondroplasia, for FDMES, for OI, and the rare hypophosphatemia one is currently being designed. And you can see here that's which kinds of variables are being collected at this time. So we try to keep it as concise as possible, because we're asking, of course, for clinicians and patients to fill out extra information besides only contributing to their medical files. So I think we succeeded in FDMES quite well. We have clinician-reported outcomes and patient-reported outcomes, as well for children as for adults. The prompts that we're currently using also are the BPI and EQ5D. And there's some debate going on if we're going to use the promise questionnaires as well in the near future. But to the promise questionnaires, which is a specific way of specific questionnaire forms for patient-related outcome measures, there are sometimes there are costs involved. So that's one of the main holdbacks for using these ones for the registry. So how do you go there? So this is the website for Eurobone. There are the disease-specific modules, and you can find additional instructions there. Also, if you're not sure what type of questionnaires we're using, if you're not sure if you have the right ones, we have them there for you to download, and you can use them. And also any additional other tools like measurement of the TMP GFR, which you will be needing for completing the module, can be found there. Including instructions how often you need to fill out the module. We have the same page also for patients, where they know how to find, how to register for the module, and also how often they need to fill out the questionnaires for the module. So once you're in, you can select multiple things, and this is just a general overview on the items that we're collecting. So we're collecting anthropometry measurements like height and weight. And BMI is then automatically calculated. We have a basic disease module, which collects information about how the diagnosis was reached, on what age, which disease components are there, what kind of treatment history a patient has, how many surgeries, also what kind of type of surgeries, are they FD related, fracture related, or were they for a very different reason? Also to look at other complications of the disease and exoskeletal manifestations of the CNAS gene. Then we have a certain part which focuses on the disease characteristics, where we ask you things like, are there any endocrinopathies, specific items on bone and mineral metabolism, but also on musculoskeletal problems. And these are also can be filled out separately. If a patient suffers from McKean-Albright syndrome, we also have a specific tab there with a lot of questions about the endocrinopathies, on the age of arising of the endocrinopathies, and also on the treatment. Craniofacial FD, I didn't make a slide for that, also in the terms of time, but we're also collecting specific items from vision, on hearing loss, and on the dentist complaints over there. So there's also items there. And we have a dedicated possible complications of therapy, especially in light of everything that was just been said by Dr. Boyce on the stopping of the nose map if there were any side effects.
Sorry, Natasha.
Yeah.
Your sound just skipped the last couple of sentences.
I saw. Okay. I think it's back again because it said that the internet connection was getting unstable again.
Okay, now it's better.
Yeah, it's also stabilized again. So what I was saying for the last one is that we also have a section there specifically for side effects of therapy and also of withdrawal for instance, for the nose map or something like that. So in general, this is not something I do, of course, by myself. We have a study group within Eurobone, which thought about all these things to be collected, which I think the majority of the names are either present here or are known to everybody who are here today, except for Ana Luisa Priego Zurita. She is a research fellow who has built everything and also helped me in making these lovely slides and knows everything about disease-specific modules and how to arrange anything. So if you're interested in the project, just either mail me or drop a note on eurobone.com. And I want to emphasize that this is an open registry for everybody, so there's no need to be situated in the EU to participate. And we're collecting clinician and patient reports. So I don't know if there are any questions.
Not in the chat yet.
No, and otherwise people know where to find me. I think Mike has a question.
Yes, Mike.
Yeah, excuse me. That's really impressive. That was great, Natasha. I had several questions. So what method is there to, or what measures are in place to sort of validate the information that's entered by patients or even by physicians?
How do you mean?
In other words, they could, I mean, one of the things that in the FDMAS registry that we have always worried a bit about is misdiagnosis for one thing. So especially in the area of craniofacial fibrous dysplasia, how are we certain of the diagnosis? Is there any way to validate really any of the stuff that's reported, which is important and time consuming?
Yeah, so what we are asking, of course, is how the diagnosis was reached. Especially for the craniofacial ones, you can link that with histopathology. And of course, then the next question will be, how do you know that the pathologist was right? So I think then we have to ask Mara if she can look at all the biopsies then, but it is always difficult in these cases, but we try to, you have a step-up approach. So of course, people are only going to contribute if they are seeing a lot of patients or expert centers. So we do think that a lot of these expert centers know how to diagnose FDMES. We are asking questions about how the diagnosis was reached, and when we have, for instance, a very high entrance of centers with craniofacial fibrous dysplasia only monostatic without any problems and with no histopathology, yeah, we will definitely reach out to such a center and ask them about their protocols and how they do things. So there are different step-up approaches, I think, there. And we do think that by giving the key to the registry to the physician, there's already some sort of quality control there, because the patient can only get access if the diagnosis is confirmed by a doctor. And then the other question will be how well does that doctor know the diagnosis? But I think that's something that we also have to address within the consortium, perhaps also with the checklist for the doctors in the future.
And how about what type of data can be added to the registry? So for example, can you add histopathology images or CTs or X-rays or that sort of thing?
Yeah, so far, because we're just in the building phase and we just started, we only go for text things. So we can, of course, ask a lot of things and then people can just tap boxes to what's there. We try, because it's a central registry, so we can look at the data straight away. If you want to have a more imaging, like there are some possibilities. The other question will be that the other possibility will be that we just we know what kinds of images are being made and that these centers are being contacted for a separate research project, that we do not store it centrally, but we are aware of the centers who are doing certain items like sodium fluoride PET scanning or any other things.
And how about similarly laboratory data, you know, calcium, phosphorus, PTH, all of that?
Yeah, so we decided, because when you do the full module, even in a complicated patient, you're done within 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how many surgeries, of course, a patient had and how many drugs they were using. So we try to keep it simple, because we do know with the more info we're putting there or requesting, the less response we get. So you see with the upgoing of 10 more variables in other registries, we've seen that that the return drops tremendously, because people are not willing to start registering if they know that they have to complete a full form for 30 minutes. They will do so to get you some information about which take them 5 to 10 minutes. So there's always a difficult choice between missing out on data and getting data. And of course, there are highly specialized centers. We collect in Leiden, we collect way more than we're asking in the registry. But then again, this is open for many other centers, and by increasing the amount of people contributing to the registry, I do think it will provide a lot of useful information. And we, of course, we know who's contributing, so we can always contact them to ask them more for certain research projects.
Yeah, you know, I agree, but the point is, you know, what do you do with a lot of really superficial data? I mean, I'm not sure how valuable it is, to tell you the truth. But the other thing too, a bigger question, I think, is now there's this registry, there's the Rudy registry, there's the US FDMS registry. I think that as an organization, we really have to come up with a way eventually to have these be complementary and come together somehow. And that's just a comment, not really a question.
Yeah, so I think, so I don't fully agree with you that a lot of superficial data will not tell you anything, especially if you're looking at the natural history.
No, I didn't say not anything, not much.
Okay, not much. Well, I think it will tell us a lot, I think, in these cases. Not as much, I think, as we can get out, of course, at the data from NIH, but then again, that's a different way. But I think this can give you a lot of info. And so one of the things is to harmonize the registries, is that, of course, you know that Kasim is also part of the working group for Eurobone. So we're trying to align as much as possible. And I think the pro for this module is that we also collect clinician data. And that is something, of course, the other registries don't. I think for time, I will be more than happy to discuss more, and I will answer the questions in the chat. But in the considering of time, I will give the floor back to Adrian.
So we're moving to our closing session. I'd like to introduce Dr. Chelsea Hopkins. She's a researcher at the University of Copenhagen, and she'll update us on FDMAS animal studies. And she's working alongside Anne-Marie Heegard. I hope I said that correctly.
Yeah, so thank you. And I hope you can all see my screen and yeah. So yeah, I'm Chelsea Hopkins and I'm a PhD fellow in Anne-Marie Heegard's bone pain lab in the University of Copenhagen in Denmark. So just to give you a sort of a brief overview of animal models and disease research, I think one of the most common criticisms animal researchers get is that animals aren't humans and mice aren't humans, and we are completely aware of that, and that sort of a lot of our discussion comes into that, and the translatability between animals and humans. But animal models and I'm going to talk about mice in this presentation offer several advantages to us when studying diseases. Firstly, mouse strains are highly characterized both genetically and physiologically, so we understand a lot more about a mouse than probably we do about humans. Individual mice are also very similar to each other, giving us a homogeneous population. All of them react in a very, very similar way. And that's very important for science. But of course, then we talk about, FD, which has, patients have very individual disease profiles. So perhaps, that's something that we have to balance in animal models as well. But for the purposes of research, homogeneous populations are what we desire here. We can also collect and analyze a lot of tissue samples that we wouldn't be able to collect in patients, bone samples, a lot of blood samples, continued imaging. So animals give us that opportunity to do that. But the most important, I think, especially for a rare disease like FD, Albright syndrome, is that we can breed them early and we can breed them often. So we can get a large proportion of mice to conduct these studies, and we can get them often enough to do continuous studies. So in fact, when I started working on FD about 3 years ago, I was able to talk to Alison and Mike and Mara and Alessandro, and I was like, what is FD? Like, how do you like, what are the key features? Like, these features are here, that's FD. And they said, no, that's not FD. And I liken this then to the elephant and the blind men, that if you have a group of blind men and women, and they just look at one part of an elephant, they're going to think that it's something else, and they're all going to have different perspectives. So in this case of FD, we need to really consider the whole picture. And what are some of the features that we can measure in humans and in mice? So we have clinical features such as deformities and fractures, bone imaging such as the ground glass appearance in X-rays and CT imaging. We have histology and histomorphometry, histochemical and cellular markers, as well as blood and or urine markers for bone formation and resorption, as well as other markers. For instance, Alison mentioned FGF23. So a term that I'm going to be using often, I just want to explain it because it's very, very important when we talk about animal models of disease research. So the first one is face validity. So do the mouse symptoms match the human symptoms? Do we see very similar things in our observations? The next is construct validity. So do the humans and the mice have the same disease cause? And finally, predictive validity, which I think is very important for clinicians, especially here, that do drugs do the same thing in a mouse as they do in a human? So what I'm sort of going to be basing the rest of my presentation on here is the systematic review on FD animal models that we published very recently. So our team, the NIH team, and also the Italian team working with mouse models. So we use this Prisma format where we get all of the papers that sort of mention FD and animals. And from about 1,100 studies, we whittled this down to, just about 20 studies on FD. So we have implant models, which I'm not going to talk about here, but you can read more about it or email me. Then I'm going to briefly touch upon mechanistic models. So these are really studying the mechanisms involved in the development of FD. But what I'm mainly going to focus on here are what we call the causative models. So these are models that have the R201 mutation of FD in the mouse itself. So the first one I'm going to give you some information about is the EF1 alpha and also the PGK-Riemannucci models. And these were first described in 2014. These demonstrate this ubiquitous, so it occurs in every cell in the mouse body, and constitutive, so that means that it's continuously working, activation of the gene. What we analyzed here was that it actually represents high face validity. So what we see in the mouse was very similar to what we see in patients. It does have a long time of onset, which is beneficial for some studies that want to analyze perhaps a drug over a long period of time. But of course, in research, if you want, something to be done quickly and perhaps a little bit more economically, that can be a disadvantage. Due to the fact that it is present in all cells, there is potential McCune-Albright syndrome induction. And really, the EF1 alpha model was the only one to test anti-rank ligand and zoledronic acid treatment in their mouse model. So that's very exciting, actually being able to take treatments that have been used in patients already and test them in a mouse model. And I think that's really exciting. The next one is what we coined the PRX-Gutkin model. This was first described in 2017. And here, instead of it being expressed in every cell, these are limited to skeletal stem cells. So we really only see it in long bones and the cranium. This is tetracycline inducible. So you have the mouse, it's completely normal and healthy, resembling a normal mouse. And then you give it this drug tetracycline, which is an antibiotic, and it turns on the gene. So it starts expressing the mutated gene in the mice, in only the skeletal stem cells. The advantage of this is you can really induce it at any age. So you can induce it during fetal development all the way up to adult mice. So it's really a big advantage to use that there. This also demonstrates high construct validity because it uses a human mutated GLFS subunit cDNA construct to initiate the mutation and the disease. And as well as the Riemannucci models, this also demonstrates high face validity. And it has quite a fast time of onset. So that's very useful for research. We next have the PRX-Young model. So this also uses the PRX promoter and therefore also is limited to skeletal stem cells. This has a Cree system, so that means that it's limited to the skeletal stem cells, but it uses the endogenous promoter. So while it may not demonstrate the same construct validity as the previous model, we retain the normal physiology of the mice. So really its regulatory mechanisms in the cells remains the same. So there is a little bit of debate whether, high construct validity versus endogenous promoters and this normal physiology is preserved. And again, represent high face validity and similar to the previous model, a fast time of onset. We have 3 other causative models. So these all contain the causative mutation of FD, but they weren't as thoroughly described as the previous models. So the first one is the PRX-Bistepi model. The next one is the OSX-Young model. And the last one is the SOX9-Young model. They had incomplete descriptions in the literature, and therefore I think it's very difficult to draw conclusions about their validity in all 3 cases. But further studies are required, and I think they present very unique and exciting mechanisms, perhaps to study other features of FD and perhaps unique mechanisms. Then we had two other models, which I think are very unique. The first one was the genetic mutation being induced in very early embryonic stem cells. These are activated very, very, very early during development. And what we saw there was that this was a fatal mutation. But then when we go on to express this mutation in committed osteoblast cells, so these are not stem cells, they're not going to differentiate further, we see this hyperostotic phenotype develop, which isn't FD. So both of these are containing the same mutation. And even though they don't represent, an FD model that we can really study, they yield very important information for us. If you express it in early embryonic cells, it's fatal. But if you express it in very committed osteoblast cells, you get this hyperostotic model that does not represent FD. And Mara wrote a paper in 2006 with other co-authors, of course, and titled Fibrous Dysplasia as a Stem Cell Disease. And really, I think that's very true when we look at the mouse models, that there seems to sort of be a sweet spot sort of in the middle with these pluripotent or multipotent stem cells that are sort of on their way to becoming bone, but not quite committed yet. Going into the mechanistic models, so these were proposed mechanisms of FD, perhaps related to the CAMP signaling pathway, which we know is very involved in the genetic mutations. So these did not contain the R201 mutation, but focused on different pathways, such as the PKA pathway, the Wnt beta-catenin pathway, parathyroid hormone, and CFOS gene regulatory system. And lastly, there was a novel system in which a synthesized receptor that can only be activated by a synthetic ligand so that it avoids a host ligand was also proposed. So really in the future direction, when we're talking about animal models, there's really no perfect model to study the disease. There's no one model that we can do every test on, but really it's about selecting the best model to test your hypothesis. And of course, we're talking about fibrous dysplasia and McCune-Albright syndrome in this meeting. So why didn't I really mention anything about McCune-Albright syndrome? And that's really because no model for it has been characterized or developed. But the closest sort of that we can assume is the Riemann-Nucci models, because it develops ubiquitously. However, it hasn't actually been, fully characterized there, but I think that's a very exciting path to go down. But of course, endocrinopathies do play a large role in this disease and they can't be ignored. And also fibrous dysplasia may also be affected by endocrinopathies and a hormone imbalance. So in a way, these models are a little bit limited in that respect. And several features of FD including McCune-Albright syndrome haven't really been investigated in mouse models yet. So there's certainly room for exploration. But I think, as well as that, I think exciting for clinicians here is also testing the predictive validity of these models in terms of treatment efficacy. So of course, I had a lot of help writing the paper and it was a fun process. So I have to acknowledge my co-authors at NIH and also at Sapienza University of Rome. So thank you.
So Chelsea, thank you very much for this very nice overview. So I didn't see any questions in the chat, but are there any questions from the audience? At this moment?
Okay.
At this moment?
No.
No, just some compliments for you in the chat about you giving a great talk by Julia. Okay, so then I think I will give back the floor to Adrian for the final closing.
You might have to excuse my dog.
Oh, yeah.
There's a leaf outside. So I want to thank everybody for attending, and I want to give my special thanks to Natasha, to Mike, and to Martine and Tova for really creating such a wonderful program and gathering everybody together. I think that there's a lot that we're going to move forward on. I'm looking forward to the upcoming conference. I don't know if there's time to go in the breakout rooms at this point.
Yeah.
So I guess we'll end with the breakout rooms. Again, thank you everybody for attending. I'm really hopeful about how the community will move forward and about drug development and just basically finding the well-being for patients and their families who suffer from FDMAS. Thank you.
So again, I will open the breakout rooms. You can either choose yourself. So we on special request, we also made a Spanish speaking breakout room at the moment. Well, the breakout room, of course, doesn't speak Spanish, but you know what I mean. And if you want to go somewhere, just unmute yourself and ask me if you can't find it, or share it in the chat, then I can also put you somewhere you would like to go to. So the rooms are open again. I would just put some people. You can either choose yourself, and otherwise I will put you in specific rooms there for you to go there. And remember to press yes if you're invited to join a breakout room, because otherwise you can't enter.